Hi, my name is Norm, and I'm grateful to be here to talk to you about the latest release of LabVIEW 2025 Q3 and the features that it brings to the table for you as a developer or as an engineer. In the recent releases of LabVIEW, we have accelerated and increased the amount of features that we're bringing to you to help you get your job done faster. And in this session, we're going to go through the myriad of ones that we've brought to the table, everything from enhancing workflows to AI accelerators. And just as a quick summary, I wanted to note on what we're doing as NI software to strengthen software, connect the workflows, and build communities. And ideally, this release in this video is going to highlight that in a multitude of different ways, because we know whether it's security or the ability to have a more stable platform, the ability to connect you to your hardware or any other NI software, or the ability to work together as a community of engineers and scientists doing the job that we need to do. NI is moving forward and trying to enhance all of those dimensions. So speaking of all those dimensions, let's focus specifically on LabVIEW 2025 Q3. So in this session, we're going to talk about, one, Nigel, our AI assistant for test and measurement applications. We're going to be going through some of the enhances of debug and development for you as developers, our continued investment in third-party languages and how LabVIEW works with them, in particular .NET. We're going to be talking about how LabVIEW has improved its abilities to do software engineering for continuous integration or continuous deployment. And lastly, talking about some of the LabVIEW community features and some of the things that you as LabVIEW developers out there have been doing to add on to the LabVIEW project and enhance all of our worlds. So let's start off with Nigel and AI. Now, of course, AI being the buzzwords and large language models, there's no escaping it. Now, what NI has been doing, and maybe you heard it at NI Connect, is we are releasing and have released with LabVIEW 25 Q3, Nigel, our AI assistant. But this isn't a homegrown AI chatbot with like that we're competing with, say, OpenAI or Claude or any of the other AI tools out there. Far from it. We are building on top of those tools, making them purpose-tuned for the world of test and measurement. So when you ask Nigel about something like hardware, you can give it just a simple hardware number and say, hey, what's the sampling rate of this? And it will be able to discern from your typical AI chatbot what you mean, because it has context of who you are and what you're about to do. Now, some of the other things that we're going to be able to do is look into the code that we're talking about. Now, for what we have for Nigel, there's only really one Nigel, but we've custom tuned it for both LabVIEW and TestStand to understand the language, the environment, the features, as well as the rest of the NI ecosystem, but specific interest goes towards these two pieces of software for the release that we're on for Q3. So rather than spend more time in a presentation, let's go ahead and get into the code and see what it looks like. So recently I've gotten into recreational math and calculating things like pi out to 2,000 digits. And so in order to get started on this, I started asking around the community, and I found that there was a VI that had some code already associated with it to calculate these things. Now, this was someone else's code. It's relatively cleanly made, but I didn't know how to necessarily interpret it. So I figured, hey, let's go to Nigel and see what Nigel has to say about what we've got. So if you're a LabVIEW developer, the thing that you want to be able to do, if you bring up context help by pressing Control-H as a hotkey, you should be able to see here very easily we have a discuss with Nigel option. So when you click on that, you'll see that Nigel does show up. It will log in automatically if you've already done it before. And now you can see that it's starting to chew on the VI that you're working with. And that's a great capability. That's truly differentiated. You're only going to get that with Nigel. And so it's going through the code, it's uploading it, and now it's starting to analyze the different parts and pieces of that individual algorithm. Now, you may have seen this before at NI Connect and things like that, but I really wanted to call out some of the unique things that it's doing because what it's doing is it's not just interpreting the names of the controls and indicators and other things like that. It's actually thinking about what the code is doing. And one of the sections that is particularly interesting is like right here, it's talking about how it figured out what type of algorithm we're actually using to calculate the parts and pieces of the many digits of pi. So I know this isn't a presentation to talk about the different algorithms that are available there, but something like that really impressed on me the level of thought that's happening in the interpretation of your LabVIEW code. So ideally that should make your life a lot easier as you start to use tools like Nigel. So some of the other things that you should know about Nigel that it can do is not only can you discuss the specific VI, but you can do something even as simple as, tell me about the 6009, tell me about the 6009, right? And and it will start to go through and it will figure out, well, I'm an NI person, or I'm working with NI products. 6009 has some relevance. And with short order, we'll see a display here that starts to talk about the USB 6009 as though you had actually gone to ni.com and searched for those results. All right, so we've got the ability to, now that Nigel's finished calculating and figuring out what we meant by such an obtuse question there, you'll see that it figured out it was talking about the NI USB 6009, its features, and it went from there. So just once again, an illustration of what Nigel's bringing to the table above and beyond just your typical chatbot that brings a lot of value to those of you who are using it. So the other thing about Nigel that is unique is that it's going to continue to get better from quarter to quarter as we release new software, but we're going to be continuing to update the algorithms and the overall model that's available and being used on the web. So stay tuned, continue to use Nigel, see what works well, and expect that it's going to continue to get better at a rapid pace, much like most of the rest of the world of AI chatbots. So now that Nigel has finished kind of figuring out what we implied by some random numbers and talking about it, you'll see very quickly that it identified that the 6009 is an NI product. It starts to talk about things. And some of the other interesting things that are available here is it even goes through and is able to tell you the pinout of the individual device that you've got. Once again, just accelerating that time to get the job done, to use the hardware that you've got, and to use the software. So Nigel is made to work with LabVIEW, made to work with TestStand, but also made to work with test and measurement at large, or also the NI hardware platform. Now, the workflow that I've shown you so far is basically asking about an individual VI or bringing Nigel to the forefront. But one of the other things that's probably worth noting is that on the diagram, we have a search bar up here. And so if you are somebody who works with Python and you want to go ahead and start to try to understand, hey, where's this common function? Once again, Nigel understands what you're talking about probably, and it's going to connect you with parts of LabVIEW that match with what you're looking for. And so a tuple is akin to a cluster in LabVIEW. And so if you're talking about that, you can see that we have some very specific things that LabVIEW has called to the forefront. And if you hover over an individual element there, it will give a little bit of the rationale for why that individual item was chosen. So once again, it's just things that we're trying to do to connect you to the basically Nigel within the environment and get you to whatever operation you're looking for. All right. So now that we've talked a little bit about Nigel and how that can help you understand individual code, how it's thinking about what you're doing and your code base, and even getting you to examples, we're going to talk a little bit more about accelerating the developer experience. Now, years ago, we introduced quick drop to the LabVIEW language so that you can pretty quickly just press Control Space and start to type in something like for loop, and you can start to add something to your overall diagram. But with this latest release of LabVIEW, we've added quick open or quickly open things. So if I press Control-Shift-O, you'll now see that I have the ability to open something quickly. Now this will scan the project contents that are already open and recent files and recent projects so that you can save you a little bit of time from having to navigate your disk or navigating a menu. So if I just type in just Q3 actually, it's going to show me a filtered list of the things, and now I have the project appropriate for what we're working with here. Go ahead and hit enter, zoom back out, and in just a moment, you'll see that the project will end up loading. Let's go through and evaluate another scenario that's very, very helpful for the quick open feature. So I have an application here that actually is an actor framework application. It's one of the shipping sample projects. And there's a lot of libraries. There's a lot of content here. But I know exactly what I want to get to is most of these projects have a VI called launcher. So in the same manner that I did it before, I'll press Control-Shift-O, I'll put launch, if I can spell it right, there you go. And so with a little bit of effort, you can see that I now have three different things. I can see the library, I can see the individual VI, and I can go ahead and open up the splash screen that will get me to the relevant information. Now you see that unfortunately my VI automatically had an error pop up. And so this actually brings me to something that we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of automatic error logging. But before we get there and talking about errors, let's talk a little bit about what we need in terms of debugging. So if I'm going to go through and have an individual VI that runs, debugging is a very typical existence that we as any programmer live in. And so what we want to be able to do is to highlight some of the new features that we've put with the debug window. Now, previously within LabVIEW, you had a window for your probes and a window for your breakpoints, but now what we have is a unified existence where I can set a number of individual breakpoints across my code, and I can also go through and set probes on multiple things. So now you can see within the probe window itself that we have the ability to look at multiple of them there, all within that same unified display. Once again, ideally accelerating the time that it's going to take for you to go through and do your debug. Now, we didn't just unify those things. We also added a lot of features to this window that ideally are going to help you out. So now that we've got a unified experience, we've also given you more than just the ability to see them together. We've given you the ability to go ahead and even do something as simple as rename. So this is accelerometer data, and let's see what wire 4 is. You should be able to right click and highlight the object, and then you can see that it's there. It's like, oh, that is the current data. So let's go ahead and rename that one. Once again, current. And so ideally, you're already having an accelerated experience in a more complicated than this type of scenario. But even something else that I find very, very useful is that we have the ability to show the probe display for an individual element. And if I go ahead and I run this VI, you're going to see it's going to break point. We're going to step through and step over these individual calls. And now that it has run, you can see that we have the data stored in an array. And so that's valid, it's valuable, and we could do something even as nice as right click, and we should be able to export. Let's see if I can zoom in there. And we have the ability to export that data directly to clipboard for you to paste in some other application, or to even export data to Excel. So if I go through and I click on that, it'll take a moment for Excel to load, but you'll see it open up, and then my data will be stored there for whatever other purposes that you like. Now, normally the reason that somebody would go through and try to show it in Excel is just for the purpose of plotting that tabular information. But once again, we're LabVIEW developers. We don't have to do that type of operation. So how do I go through and very quickly change this this data set to something that I can see? Well, with the new debug window, we now have the ability, if I can go and scroll in here, to change to a variety of different types of probes on the fly without having to destroy and recreate a custom probe. And so if I were to go ahead and just click on Real Double Array Probe, you'll see that now I can see my data stored as a waveform. I can look at it as the spectrum of the information, or even just that raw information and some other information as well. Now this is a custom probe that I made, but really it's just a VI that takes that same data set and shows it in different fashions. And you can go through and you can experiment with what's here, or go ahead and create your own new custom probe. Now, some of the other things within the probe window that are really useful is that now we have the ability, especially in a complex scenario where we've got a lot of things open and whatnot, is the ability to invoke it via hotkey. So just by pressing Control-D, that will now bring that to the forefront. Or if you like to have kind of the behavior that we had before, you can see that if you click the gear, we now have the ability to go ahead and either hide or show the probe display. We can go ahead and keep the window on top. Or one of the other new features is the ability to show the value on the wires. And so if I were to go ahead and do that, you'll see here very quickly, if I add a probe to my path and I go ahead and I run this, you'll now see that it has a bit of information associated with that. Now, in this case, it's a path that goes too far, but even the ability to see information on the probe or on the wire without having to turn on execution highlighting is very useful. Now, in the world of debugging and just creating code, you're going to run into errors. Now, a feature that's been in LabVIEW for a long time is automatic error handling. So if you have an unwired error on a method, and of course, if something happens, it will prompt you with the display similar to this. So I have a simple application that I'm working here. I'm working with a thermal camera and a microcontroller that's communicating with LabVIEW. And if I go through and I run this individual VI, you'll see that we have a problem. The onboard temperature sensor is failing. And so there might be some kind of issue. But the problem ends up being is if I just hit continue or stop, there's no indication as to what that error was. And up to this point, you would have completely lost it. Well, in 25Q3, we now have the ability to look at and automatically log those errors to disk. Now, what I have within my project is I've actually have a automatic populating folder that links to the LabVIEW data unwired errors directory. And so now I should be able to double click on that. And now it will go ahead and prompt me with the individual, all the unwired errors that have happened in my application. And you can see that I now have my last one that happened, and I can get some information about which VI specifically caused it, when it happened. And although it's not all the information about the error, ideally it's going to give you more insights than just the fact that an error happened and it disappeared. And so when you run into these errors, if you want to see where they're being saved at, or to be able to turn it on and off, you should just be able to go to the Tools menu and Options, and then underneath the block diagram palette, if you scroll down the block diagram category, you should be able to see there's an error handling section where you can get more information about where that file is, or conditionally turn on or off the actual logging of that. Okay, well, now that we have an error within our code base, and well, there's something wrong with my onboard temperature sensor on my thermal camera, let's go ahead and comment around that. And that brings us to our next feature, is a great one that I love, of diagram disable. Now, within most languages, you have the easy ability to just comment out a chunk of code by adding a // or a /*, or whatever your language needs. Well, within LabVIEW for generations, we've had the diagram disable structure, where you can go through and select and comment out a section of code. And now this wouldn't run anymore. Well, up to this point, what would end up happening is the enabled case, you would no longer pass through specific data flow items. Well, within 2025 Q3, we've enabled a little bit more intelligence within the diagram disable structure to determine whether or not data flow needs to be preserved or can be preserved for that chunk of code. Once again, saving you development time during that rapid iteration process that LabVIEW excels at so well. So I hope you like that one. That's absolutely one of my favorite features. I think it was Jim Kring from JKI was the one that had officially requested that from the Idea Exchange. And so now that we've gone through and we've disabled that section of individual code, we should be able to run this, and now you should be able to see, hey, there I am in the background testing my thermal camera, and I'm up and operational again. Peace. Okay, so we're gonna step back to calculating pi for just a brief moment in Nigel. Now, Nigel gave us some great insights, and so what we wanna do is kind of capture that and have that saved on the VI. So this is gonna be to highlight one of the newer features on the block diagram. So if I say I wanted to just copy some of those specific parts of the code and put it on the block diagram and paste, you'll see that it's a rather large chunk of code. And so now that I've got it on my block diagram, you can see it's a little bit larger, but one of the new features that we've got is on free floating text labels, we now have the ability to automatically have a vertical scroll bar associated with the text itself, and you have the ability to scroll through those individual portions of code, which is very useful for if you want to leave some verbose documentation, but not occupy a very large portion of the block diagram. Now, speaking of free-floating text, another recent change is if you happen to be within an individual free-floating text and you press Control-A, instead of selecting all elements on your block diagram as we used to, it now selects all elements within the free-floating text box itself. Once again, these are small, minor things, but altogether they add up to a smoother developer experience, and that has been requested by the community. That's absolutely where we're getting some of these ideas from, and trying to not only innovate with new things like Nigel, but also make sure that we're giving you the little things and the quality of life improvements that you're looking for. So continuing down the theme of the community requested features, another one was the ability to have the text within certain nodes always aligned to the left. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Now I've got a simple VI here that's doing something that we'll talk about in just a little bit, but at the core of it, this is just a small illustration of what we've changed, where now we've left justified all the text within the individual nodes for bundle and unbundle, and a myriad of other individual kind of data structure types on the block diagram, making your code easier to read for you or easier for other people to read as well. All right, so coming back to our Pi example here, another feature that's in 25Q3 is an improved context help experience for when you're hovering over certain elements. In particular, for what we've got here, let's go into over the multiply, and you can see that now we have new pieces of information in the notes section for certain VIs. We are in particular calling out whether or not something is reentrant, whether it's its reentrancy type, its execution mode, whether of course it's subroutine or something else. And there's more information that we continue to add here. So in order to determine how an individual piece of code is expected to run, you don't have to go into the properties for that individual module. This is actually, once again, a user contributed or a community contributed recommendation from Mr. Jim. So thank you for that one. Now, beyond just individual sub-VI properties, we also are showing more information about our call library function node. So if I zoom out here and I drop something on the block diagram, this is from our Digilent waveforms, our academic line, and we're going to go into something that has a call a library node on the block diagram. If I pull that up here, and what you'll see here as I hover over that node, something new shows up within this definition. What we're actually seeing here is the ability to go ahead and see the function prototype that's being called from within, including the actual prototype of it, and then also the path to the individual DLL. Now, in this case, if it's a system level DLL, you're just going to see kind of the shorter path to it. But once again, instead of needing to go into a dialog to try to determine critical information for your application, we're presenting it to you in the context help window. So within LabVIEW 2025 Q1, we talked about how we were able now to call into .NET Core, whereas previously it was just .NET Framework. And we were able to call the methods and properties, but we couldn't do callback events. Well, with 2025 Q3, we now have the ability to register for specific events, just like you used to do with ActiveX back in the day, or now what you could do with .NET Framework. And so we're continuing to try to reach parity with .NET Framework, and so there's still work to be done in that area, but this is definitely a huge improvement to allow you to use .NET 8 Core and other core-based .NET implementations 8 and 9 and so on into the future. All right, so let's pivot out of the diagram a little bit and let's talk about the process of improvements that we've given to sharing code or working with others in your team. A common tactic or tool to use when you're sharing your code with someone else is to use a source distribution. And we've made updates to the default behaviors on source distributions in this release. In particular, that when you have a source distribution and you go to the additional exclusions, we now have set the default behavior for if the compiled code is included as you give someone your code to go along with it. Now, it used to be it would enable or separate the code, but now we just have it adhering to whatever you've declared in your project as it is, giving you a little bit more control or expectation of how this is going to go. Now, speaking of source distributions, it's not all too uncommon that when you go to share your code, you're going to put it in a different location. And it used to be that if your length of your path when you distributed it or when you actually went through the process here would go beyond 255 characters. Now in this case, you can see that I have a path here that is clearly egregiously long and goes beyond what would be reasonable, but now with LabVIEW 25 Q3, that's no longer an issue. It naturally and gracefully handles path lengths that go and extend beyond that 255 degree character limit, whatever your directory structure is during that distribution process. So staying with the sharing code theme, within the last release of LabVIEW, we talked about enhancements to the VI comparison report. We could now export to an HTML document, and it gave you more control over some of the visuals of what was shown there and really just kind of the workflow improvements. Well, now we've gone through and continued to improve on that, where we've enabled the ability to do a VI comparison report from a command line interface. And so the reason that this ends up mattering so much is that if you are working in a software engineering practice where you're doing continuous integration and deployment, you want to be able to automatically create these reports to go along with, say, your pull request or other things as you're checking them into source code control. So the ability to go ahead and have this automatically instantiated, not interactively, but programmatically through the command line interface for LabVIEW should be good news to anybody who's working in those software engineering domains. So within our investment of best practices in software engineering, we've also gone through the process of enabling LabVIEW to be run within a Docker container. Now, for those of you, once again, invested in the process of software engineering and continuous deployment, this is going to be great news because now you can have basically workers spun up or shut down without having to have a pool of, say, virtual machines, and you can go to hub.docker.com and search for the LabVIEW image that's there and see if that works for you. Now, with all of these things that we've been investing in LabVIEW, we want to hear back from you. So whether or not you reach out to your individual NI representative or put comments in the video below, this is going to matter a lot so that we can find out what features of some of these CI/CD workflows are really working well for you or where they're not. So let us know. We're very eager to hear back from you in all of those dimensions. Okay, so lastly, let's talk about NI's open source initiative working with the community to basically implement together parts and pieces of LabVIEW. NI's open source initiative is nothing inherently new. We've been contributing to open source projects on GitHub since around 2014 or even before. But what's happening very recently is NI is very specifically investing time, not just posting code, to work with the community to create, there's actually a project manager dedicated to this. There are the CI/CD processes in place so that if something gets committed to the GitHub repository with a pull request, a lot of things happen automatically. And specifically, we've already started integrating some of those things directly into the product. So some of the changes that have been committed and approved by either the advisory board or by NI. So if I were to go back into LabVIEW, you should be able to see that if I just go ahead and double click on one of the icons and bring up the editor, let's say I wanted to go ahead and change the border for some reason or experiment with it. I'm going to go ahead and put a big red border around the outside of it just to see what that looks like. And very quickly I determine it's not. Well, the community decided that if I press escape, I want to automatically start to exit, and I'd like to be prompted whether or not I want to save or commit my changes. It's a seemingly simple thing, but it actually has given us at NI the ability to flesh out all of those workflows to go ahead and determine like, hey, what works? How fast can we do these pull requests? What's the CI/CD process? And iron all of those parts and pieces out. So something very simple as an icon editor has led to a great improvement in all of these things, where now we're expanding all of that effort to not only be, as you can see down here in the bottom, we're not only doing the icon editor, but we've also open sourced core parts of the Actor framework, a key framework for enabling distributed and extensible applications. And so for those of you that love Actor framework, get online and find out more about the open source initiative that we're communicating through on Discord and also on the NI open source GitHub that we already have. All right, so let's wrap it up here. Hopefully that made it very clear that NI is trying to re-engage with the community and investing time and resources. And that includes the idea exchange. Many of the features that I had talked about previously, I was mentioning some of the community members that had recommended them. For anybody that I forgot, I'm sorry. You can go ahead and hit me up on Discord and let me know that I forgot your name, and I'll give you some kudos there. But get re-engaged. That's where we're actually driving a lot of these new features from LabVIEW in. And if you've got something that you're looking for specifically, please request it. That's indeed where we go to make sure that we're staying aligned with what you're looking for, as well as innovating into areas like Nigel and beyond. So let's close it for a wrap. What did we talk about today in terms of those focus areas? One, we've got Nigel, giving you the ability to go ahead and interrogate, investigate not only VIs, but your test system and hardware and software at large. Ideally, you've seen and felt that there's better ways to develop and debug your applications with large features and small features, from the debug window all the way up to just text being aligned differently. We have the ability to continue to invest in that .NET Core capabilities and get parity with .NET Framework. If you're working with software engineering workflows, we've given you more abilities to work with that. And then lastly, we're investing our time and love into the community and community-driven features and open source projects. So we appreciate your time and attention. Please go ahead and put some comments below. Let us know what part of this worked well for you, what you didn't like, or what you wanted to see more of. And stay tuned and like and subscribe to the NI channel so that you can be up to date on all the features and even possibly some deeper dives into some of these new features like Nigel and the debug window that hopefully I'll be rolling out soon. Thanks.